So tonight we're going to hear from Stuart. Stuart, give us a quick wave. Master brewer extraordinaire is going to be telling us about all things Lemongrass Lager. Andy, give us a wave.
Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Our tea master extraordinaire is going to be giving us a bit of an intro to teapigs and all of the amazing work that they are doing as our partner in crime for this beer and fellow B Corp. And then Louisa, give us a wave.
Hi.
And so welcome Louisa, my fellow partner in crime, co-leader here at Toast, COO, and she will be talking through the impact of the beer, which is ultimately a big part of why we have brewed this very, very tasty beer. All right, no further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Stuart, to talk us through the wizardry behind creating such a delicious beer, please.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yes, wizardry might just be the apt word for this particular beer. Hi there, good evening, everyone. Just before we dive into the Lemongrass Lager, for those of you that are perhaps maybe unfamiliar with Toast's ethos, we are about using surplus bread and replacing a proportion of the malted grains, the barley or wheat or similar in our beers. And really, just before I dive into the actual lager itself, just a bit of a background as to why we're doing that. Not only from the food waste side of things and the surplus, which Louisa and Rob will no doubt talk to you about in due course, but from my perspective, what we're doing is we're trying to replace fermentable sugars, the stuff that turns into the alcohol through the whole process of mixing grains and so on with the water. And bread itself is obviously made mostly from wheat. There are other things in there like rye and spelt and so on. But we take the bread and we dry some bread, and we can use that, or we can extract sugars from that. I'm going to talk a little bit about sugars later on, about how we use the wizardry to get a sort of a low alcohol beer. But broadly speaking, there's two types of sugars in brewing. There's fermentable sugars, the ones that our lovely little yeast fellas love to get hold of, convert those into carbon dioxide, water, and alcohol. And then there's unfermentable sugars. And the only real thing you need to think about is unfermentable sugars are huge, big sugars that the yeast can't essentially bite. Imagine that the yeast teeth can't go around it, for want of a better expression, can't crack into the big sugars. What we do with the bread, we have complex sugars, and we break that down in the mashing process, which is where we mix the grains, the bread, and the brewing liquor together in a big thing called a mash vessel, a mash tun, and some beautiful enzymes get to work. The same kind of enzymes that you've got in your mouth right now, which are alpha amylase and beta amylase. And those enzymes crack on working with very complex sugars, cutting them down into different chain particles. So best way of thinking about it is a bit like a sugar, like a big long rope ladder. And the first enzyme comes in, it's a wonderful one called alpha amylase. That cuts all over the place, random, with sort of a big set of shears. Second one is beta amylase, and that cuts a bit more specifically and produces fermentable sugars. So the whole idea behind...
Stuart, just to interrupt you briefly, but just to make sure everyone knows that you're going to test them on all this in about 20 minutes time. So I hope everyone's taking notes.
There is a quiz here, and pass mark is 90%. That's the usual standard.
Tuesday night panic suddenly, Stuart. I mean, you're testing us on our enzymes, but no, do crack on. And just to say, whilst I'm interrupting you, anyone that has any questions, do just like pop them in the box. I think everyone's familiar enough with how these things work by now. Type them down, and I will do my level best to try and steer those questions at the end towards everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. So we've got our sugars, and we're basically replacing a proportion of the barley sugars we've had from malted barley by using the surplus bread, which we've dried into a crumb form. Most beers, what you do is you take your barley and you work out how strong you want that beer to be, 4%, 5%, 6%. And then you add so many kilograms of barley or wheat or bread to get that strength. The trick with a low alcohol beer is that you still want to get the body, the flavor, the sort of the mouthfeel within that beer, but you actually don't want to put any sugar into it, because if there's sugar in there, the yeast will go to work on it, and then we'll have an alcoholic beverage, which is not what we're after. So there's a few things we can play around with. Some of my brewing colleagues elsewhere in the world have access to wonderfully expensive pieces of kit that they can produce a beer at 5% alcohol and then essentially strip out the alcohol through various processes, either boiling under pressure or osmosis. We don't have that luxury. We've got to be a little bit more careful with our little yeasty fellas and provide them with an environment whereby they don't get too excited. They kind of make a little bit of alcohol, but then kind of give up and say the party's over because we don't want to go too far.
Lazy yeast, basically.
Yeah, kind of lazy yeast, Rob, but we deliberately make the conditions lazy for them. So, you know, it's January. I'm sure we've all tried to, or possibly not tried, maybe all thought about getting out, having a run, doing a bit of exercise after the excesses of the festive season.
I've thought about it loads.
Yeah,
loads
indeed.
of thinking about it.
Well, that's what we want to do with the yeast. We want them to think about doing something, but kind of disincentivize them. You know, it's a bit cold out there for them, or a bit warm, whatever it may be. So when we're making our low alcohol beer, typically if this was a 4 or 5% beer, we would have, for the volume we were making, which was about 5,000 litres, probably in excess of 450, 500 kilograms of wheat, bread and barley all mixed in together. In this particular beer, for the same volume, we had somewhere in the region of about 175 kilograms. So the challenge for us is the choice of the malts that we're going to use, because if it was all standard malt and standard bread, that would be exceptionally thin. You'd be kind of pouring it away literally just like water. So we use some interesting malts which are called melanoidin malts, and they have a very complex sugar. So go back to that idea of the big rope ladder. These are sugars in the malt that are so complex the yeast cannot break them down, and they'll stay in your beer and they'll give you that body that you're feeling at the moment when you've been drinking the beer. That's coming from the malt choices. We also do a couple of things in terms of the temperature of the process. So when we're mashing, when we're putting the brewing liquor and the malts and the breadcrumb together, we actually go for a very, very high temperature compared to normal. So we're typically going in at about 75, maybe 76 degrees. We would usually mash at about 63. The reason for that is that higher temperature is preferential to the alpha amylase, this kind of the random cutting. So that rope ladder, that big complex sugar, is being cut randomly, whereas the beta amylase, which is the one that gives the fermentable sugars, works at a much lower temperature, about 62. So we've deliberately selected in the brewing process not to create those fermentable sugars. Still lots of sugar in there because that's, again, the body and the mouth and the flavor, but the wrong kind for the yeast.
And Stuart, just to say, I think it's fair to say that you took a little bit of convincing when the rest of us as a team were sort of trying to encourage you to brew us an absolutely delicious alcohol-free beer. You've been a slight late sort of conversion to the fact that you can brew beer this delicious without the body that you might typically expect that comes with ease with a beer with alcohol in it. So maybe talk us through that and how you're feeling with the outcome of this one.
Yeah, so I think as Rob comments there, the flavour of a beer is the alcohol's a solvent, and that carries the flavour of the beer through, whether it be the hops, the malt, or whatever it may be. And the challenge with something that low alcohol is you haven't got anything to carry that flavour profile through with you. So you have to use some innovative ways of actually getting that flavour into there. One of the ways we do this is essentially treat the whole beer in the fermentation side as a standard type of beer, but we stop everything going quite quickly. So the fermentation does kick off. It gets to 0.3, 0.4% alcohol, which is just enough to start some of the transformations within the hops and the malts and so on in terms of their flavour profile, but not enough to take it forward, obviously, to the strength of a standard beer. The critical point, of course, is managing that, because if we let it run, it would become a standard strength beer. So we need to be very on top of the temperatures. The critical thing, I think, in many low alcohol beers is having the depth of flavour. Because if you go back to those that remember them, the calibers of the day, they were pretty awful malty drinks with very little flavour at all. Whereas this particular lemongrass lager is complemented by the tea that we got from Andy.
So let's come on to that then, because the not so secret sauce that we've put on the front of the can is the lemongrass. And so talk us through a little bit about that, because I know that during the brewing process you were, and this is nothing to do with the high quality tea that Andy and his colleagues were providing, but you were worried about bringing in sort of an infection into the brew as well by putting in lemongrass at the stage that we were putting it in the beer. So maybe talk us through that as well.
Indeed. Well, perhaps take a step back first. I mean, I need to thank Andy for all the teas that he did send me to try in the first place, to see which was a suitable opportunity for this lager. And we did sit around and enjoy all sorts of things, from peppermint to sort of super fruits, and then obviously the lemongrass.
I thought the peach and mango was especially delicious as well. I think at some stage in the future that's got to make an appearance.
So the lemongrass was selected because essentially it had a very similar essential oil profile to a hop, because that's what gives a beer flavour from the hops. It's the essential oils that are coming through. So the lemongrass as one on its own, if you like, out of the teapigs range, offered a showcasing opportunity, as opposed to the more complex flavours of the sort of super fruits and the peach and mango that Rob's alluded to. What we need to be very careful though is, as Rob has said, putting lemongrass, it literally was a sack full of lemongrass into this beer. I think we had about 20 kilos on site, if I remember correctly. And if you add that as a non-processed and non-sort of sterile pasteurized ingredient, that can cause an infection to a beer, and then we'd be having something a bit closer to sort of a Belgian sour at this point in our lives, and we didn't want that. We wanted obviously a nice crisp lager.
Louisa would have done a fantastic job at rebranding it as a Belgian sour, but that wasn't the intention.
Not at all. So that influenced where we could actually use this in the process, and the only place we could, and it's quite apt considering it came from teapigs, is we put it in the kettle. And that in brewing process is where the sugars that we've extracted from the mash are boiling away. We've got the hops going in there to extract some flavors, and we literally got a muslin sack, and that went into the middle of the kettle, and it steeped in the kettle at the end of the boil. I think we probably exceeded teapigs' standard guidelines on making a good cup of tea with their thing, because it wasn't a couple of minutes in there, it was the best part of 35-40 minutes. But the idea was that the heat just post boiling and dropping down to 80 degrees C would not only sterilize the lemongrass and therefore avoid any infections downstream, but would also give us a chance to extract a lot of those essential oils into the beer at that time, or into the words at that time, and then send it through off to the fermentation. And then through the sort of brewing process itself, I must admit the whole brewery smelt very, very much like a sort of Asian type of curry at that particular time. There was an intense lemongrass aroma in there. That has dropped out slightly in the beer, and that's to be expected, because the yeast that are in the process have kind of absorbed some of those oils from the lemongrass as well and taken them down, and they came out in the processing. So we end up with a slightly more subtle end product than it was when it was certainly in the kettle at the first instance.
Well, it is an absolutely delicious end product, Stuart. So I'm going to bring Andy in. Stuart, thank you so much. Pleasure. An absolutely cracking job, and definitely I think we all need to raise a toast to you, especially because this really is fantastic. And I mean, again, those that don't know Stuart, and hopefully if you join us for more of these, you'll get to know Stuart very well. I mean, the most modest brewer that there is. I mean, this is receiving some really amazing reviews, and the rest of us as a team that have had nothing to do with the actual brewing get so excited about it and are kind of sharing it with each other and jumping up and down. You get this sort of occasional comment from Stuart sort of once every sort of 20th comment or something, just saying, I mean, that's what you asked us to brew, so that's what I brewed. And you're kind of like, yeah, but it's really good, Stuart. It's like, yeah, you asked me to brew it, so I did it. Anyway, so thank you, Stuart. Great job. Andy, Please sort of tell us all about all things teapigs. We're incredibly proud to work with you. The very nature, obviously, this beer, all about the oceans, all about plastic free. Couldn't think of a better B Corp to partner with, who is both highlighting that very issue, but also obviously giving us some incredible flavour choices to pop into this beer. So tell us more about what you're doing at Teapigs.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Rob, Louisa and Stuart. Thank you so much for having me, everyone at Toast. And nice to meet you all. My name's Andy. I run the Teapigs tea schools. And I also look after all sort of like all the different trainings and things. So I'm in charge of all things tea. Normally our tea schools run about sort of 2 hours long, but in about 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you quickly sort of like who teapigs are, particularly then in terms of the sustainability of what we're trying to do as a brand, and then also really quickly how you actually get tea, sort of where tea comes from, how it's produced, how it's manufactured, and how it gets sort of from there to your mug. Being a bit of a specky, I can see that I'm reflecting, so I'm going to take these off just so that I can see you all better. If you learn nothing from me today, hopefully you're going to learn a couple of pub quiz answers. So I mean, that's fair enough, really. I mean, but one thing to kind of get you thinking about stuff, because we are a nation of tea drinkers in Britain. Does anyone want to guess how many cups of tea we actually get through in Britain every single day? So sort of collectively, I mean, I drink about 5 or 6. That's probably gone up even more so since I've been working from home. I don't know why I do that. I do work from home.
I think answers in the chat box. Let's
yeah, pop it in the chat, and Rob, if you can kind of like keep tabs on that. But to give you a bit
it's
of
unbelievable that you're offering a lifetime supply of tea for the winner.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's so kind of you.
And £1 million. But yeah, so to give you a clue, we're an island of like what 67 million people. So there you are, and we have been a nation of tea drinkers for many, many centuries now. But tea at the turn of the century even looked very different to what it does now. I mean, coffee was becoming cool again. It previously spent a lot of times in the doldrums, and I heard quite an articulate quote that all coffee did was, between the 1950s and the 1990s, was flavour the breath of the geography teachers of the country. Whereas then around about the year 2000, it got cool again. Like all the coffee shop chains came in, loads of people were interested about how their beans were ground, how they were roasted, the sustainability. Coffee was trendy, whereas tea was not. I mean, good tea was really, really exclusive. You could get a really good cup of tea, but that was maybe more sort of like stuffy tea shops or fancy hotels. And if you didn't know the difference between your Assam and your Oolong, you felt a bit weird. And so everyone else, even though we are a nation of tea drinkers, was sort of drinking this, which essentially is dust. There's a poorer quality tea in there, which is a shame because we deserve better. What sort of like were some of the answers coming through? I don't know, Rob, if you've seen the...
Yep. So we've got everything from 10 million to 1 billion.
1 billion. Oh, great. Okay. Ping it roughly in the middle. It's 165 million cups of tea every single day in Britain, which is more than double the amount of coffee. So we really are tea drinkers.
That is it. So I, again, doing our sort of beer masterclasses, as you do your tea masterclasses, we're very the fact that beer is the 3rd most consumed drink in the world after water and then tea.
Water and tea.
And so, but quickly followed up by beer.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you pipped us to the post.
Only just. I believe once upon a time, sort of like they did used to drink a lot of beer and spirits because it was cleaner than the water that they actually had available to them. So sort of even before tea, sort of like you've got your spirits there drinking.
Don't get us started. We'll start talking about witches and all sorts if we get into that, but crack on.
This is another masterclass, I guess. Absolutely. So basically with that, Nick and Louise, who co-founded Teapigs, they wanted to change that. They met working for another tea company, and Louise is a trained tea taster. So she traveled the world tasting loads of amazing teas and saw that there was better gourmet and premium teas elsewhere in the world, more so than Britain. And so what they wanted to do was make quality tea using better whole leaf tea, or for our infusions, using better whole berries, whole herbs and spices. Plus, whilst doing that, wanting to run the business sustainably, like giving back to communities and also doing a bit more good through business. And that's how Teapigs was born, really, getting people to drink real tea, real quality tea again, and to do tea a little bit differently, maybe with a bit more of a smile on our face. So as we say, quality is really, really important. Quality, big, cool, it's really simple. There's no dust there. There's no artificial flavourings. And our tea, out of 34 teas in our range, they all come in these cornstarch tea temples. We call them tea temples because tea this good belongs in a temple. I didn't make that up. We just have to say it. But it's basically the quality of loose tea, but without the fuss. Okay. It's interesting to sort of know that so many more people obviously are singing about their ethical credentials, which is really important. And I think companies that don't talk about them, or at least tell people what they're doing, it's a bit of a red flag. And we've always wanted to make sure that people know what we've been doing from the off. So in terms of sustainability, we'll only source from well-run, sustainable tea estates. We're a member of the Ethical Tea Partnership, and our Everyday Brew, which is our English breakfast, our builder's tea, is 100% Rainforest Alliance certified. You might have seen the little green frog on some of your other products, but to have him there means that sort of it's all sustainably grown and looked after. But also, I mean, getting the
so
tea.
Is that Ethical Tea Partnership, is that a broad partnership? Are there many tea companies involved in that?
Yeah, so as it should be, it's essentially quite like fair trade, but like specifically for the tea industry. Not all the best teas necessarily are fair trade with that sort of like branch, but the Ethical Tea Partnership, I suppose, have got a bit more specialist knowledge about what it takes in that area. So it's a good area. And I guess tea companies worth their salt that are producing true teas should be members of that. But also, I mean, getting good tea to the public safely and in good condition is a really important part of the business. So people have asked us, well, how do we do this sustainably? And we've been really proud that all of our packaging comes from plants. Back in the day, with your regular sort of tea bag, this mass-produced one, there had been, if you remember the Blue Planet from David Attenborough a couple of years ago, that was a real catalyst.
I mean, this is your target market for Blue Planet watchers, so...
massively, oh, excellent. I mean, with that was really a catalyst in terms of trying to stop that and people becoming more aware and impassioned and educated about products and packaging. And the next day we got loads of phone calls on our customer service. So Leonie was picking up and people saying, have you got any plastic in your tea bags? And we hadn't really shouted about it because we never really had. We didn't think it was a thing. But what happened was with these, sometimes other companies either glue their tea bags together along the edge, or they sew them together with a plastic thread. And then to make it look all nice and aesthetically pleasing, someone a long time ago had the idea to bleach them white. So these bleached bags did have a lot of plastic in. Why you pour boiling water onto bleach and plastic and then drink it, I don't know. Because we've always, and we've been very proud to use this, which is it's a cornstarch, it's plant-based, it's called Soylent. Okay, so I don't know if anyone's got a teapigs tea temple to hand, but they're a nice big roomy bag because the big leaves need space to expand out. They're sealed to themselves along this line here, basically with heat, so it kind of gums to itself. The string is cornstarch, the tag is paper, we print with vegetable ink. So everything from here that goes into your tea, if it were all to go in, and often it will do, there's no nasties on there. There's nothing to compromise the flavour or the taste or the quality there. And because it's all plant-based, under the correct conditions, this will compost down in 10 to 12 weeks. So what you need is sort of like an industrial composting. It's the kind of council-based collection that you might, you know, put your veggie peelings and that gets taken away. And because of the pressure and heat, as I say, this will then break down. In terms of the other packaging, I mean, the cardboard, it's FSC certified, so it's, you know, it comes from sustainably grown plantations. But the big thing that we made the change to do recently was with this, which was a little plastic window. Obviously you need the plastic there, or you needed something there. We had a polypropylene, which was recyclable, but we wanted to do more. But because of the packaging needs, you needed something to obviously keep the tea dry, to keep it fresh, but also that you could see it, so you knew what you were buying. As I say, we used to use a polypropylene, but now we made the switch to something called NatureFlex. Now I can see some of your faces there, and I can see your screens. Either give us a thumbs up or give us a wave on the emojis if you've heard of NatureFlex before. a few shakes, a few nods there. This is a byproduct of wood pulp. Okay, so this is made from trees as well. So it is something that has all the factors of plastic in that it's malleable, in that it will keep things dry, but it is made from plants. And more companies are getting to use this because, like, even magazine subscriptions that come through your door, it's a packaging there that you can use as a replacement for plastic. And the way that you can tell the difference is that something called the scrunch test. I don't know if I've patented this live on air, but there we go. It's called the scrunch test. Scrunch up your plastic, scrunch up your NatureFlex. Plastic will just bounce back, whereas NatureFlex holds its shape. And this, you could not only put in your council food waste, you could actually put this in your home composting as well. So this would break down in time. And so with that, because of the tea temples, because of the box, and because of the NatureFlex window, we were the first tea company to get this, the plastic-free trust mark from A Plastic Planet. They've accredited to say that we were the first tea company in Britain, and that all our packaging there is derived from plants. And we know that it's so important that, because it can differ from road to road, council to council, in terms of what you can do with different parts of your packaging. We started popping it on the packs themselves, so you know what you can do with your tea temple, what you can do with the NatureFlex bag, and what you can do with the actual cardboard. The answer for the cardboard is just pop it in your normal recycling there. If there are any other questions, either do jump in or do pop it in the chat, but I'll keep going just to say a little bit more about, in terms of, not only is it important to make sure that they're sustainably produced, but also to give back to the communities where we get our tea. With that, we've got our own ethical scheme that gives back to vulnerable people in Gisenyi, in Rwanda. Our everyday brew contains 3 strong black teas. You've got Ceylon tea, Assam tea, and Rwandan tea. Rwandan tea is obviously from Rwanda. But like a lot of amazing tea or coffee or produce growing areas, there's a lot of poverty, and Rwanda's a case in point. So it's been amazing to give back to the communities there, to take care of the people that make it all happen. And so donations from this box go to every sale of our everyday brew, go towards the Point Foundation. We match them online, and so far we've raised nearly £400,000 for an amazing charity. So we're really, really pleased with that. But it's also not just in the supply chain, also local to Brentford in southwest London, where the teapigs offices are. And thanks to that effort, we've recently become a B Corp. So we've joined an amazing community where people are doing businesses, or people are doing business in a better way, really. I just wanted to also touch on, if people were interested, a bit more about tea itself, where it comes from, and how it's produced, if that's all right, if I've still got time, Rob, if I've got a few moments still to,
Absolutely.
to talk through that. Has anyone done a tea tasting before? Has anyone been to a tea plantation? Are we tea fans? Hopefully, we've got a few thumbs up there. Awesome. Well, before I started working for teapigs, I did not know that all true tea really comes from one bush, which is the Camellia sinensis, or the tea bush, which makes sense. I thought that maybe there was a green tea bush, a black tea bush, an English breakfast bush, an Earl Grey bush, a peppermint tea bush. I thought there were loads of different strains. And that's not the case. There's one type of bush, which is the tea bush. Yes, there are many thousands of varietals, much like there's lots of different types of grapes to make wine, but it all comes from the Camellia sinensis. It's then just the process that makes it one of, broadly speaking, one of the 4 main types of tea. Within that, you've got white tea, green tea, oolong, and then black tea, okay? In there, you've then got your different types. So like Darjeeling is a type of black tea from Darjeeling, makes sense. Our Maofeng green tea is the green tea that's from the Maofeng area in China. You might have heard of yellow tea or pu'er tea. These are sort of sub-varietals of those different types, but broadly speaking, you've got white, green, oolong, and black. All of these will have caffeine in it. There is a process which slightly changes the amount of caffeine that's in them. There's slightly less caffeine in white tea than there is to a fully oxidized black tea, but they will all have caffeine in it. Anything that doesn't come from the tea bush, therefore, isn't really tea. So whilst we talk about herbal teas, like a lemongrass tea, there's no Camellia sinensis in the lemongrass. So we would more so say it's an infusion or a tisane, if you want to score more points in Scrabble. It's a fancy word for it. So with that, you've got these things. We would look to naturally caffeine-free alternatives rather than doing a decaf. You can read so much more about this on our website, but to decaffeinate something is quite a harsh process. So you either bubble something in, you double brew it to try and strip the tea leaves of the caffeine. If you make a decaf, it's the same with coffee. Or they might chemically intervene. And again, why would you pour boiling water and drink something that's then maybe had bleaches or various things like that on it? So we would naturally go for something that's more a natural caffeine-free infusion or tea alternative. So has anyone drunk, as I look up and see all your faces, does anyone drink rooibos or red bush tea, as it were there? Yeah. So rooibos is a naturally caffeine-free black tea alternative. Rooibos means red bush in Afrikaans. So it's a South African shrub that you can treat like a builder's tea. So you can add a splash of milk if you want, but it's naturally caffeine-free. So it's always going to be better than a decaf, okay? Or if you wanted sort of a caffeine-free alternative, because more and more people drinking infusions for health benefits, because there's a cuppa that you can have at any time during the day, something to help detox you, something to give you natural energy, something to help you go to sleep. Loads of herbals or these tisanes, they've got lots of health benefits again, and they will be naturally caffeine-free, lemongrass being one of those. But really, really quickly, just to talk you through how tea is actually made, when you go to a plantation, you want to pick what's up at the top of the Camellia sinensis, the two leaves and the bud, okay? Which, if you then think about two leaves and a bud, that's very different size-wise to what you get in like one of these supermarkets dusty bags. If only I had a tea bush to show you. Oh, hello. So this is Margaret. She's named after my gran. She drank about half of those 165 million cups of tea, but she doesn't like the South London weather, so a lot of her leaves have fallen off. But what you can see up at the top there is the two leaves and the bud, right? And that is what you're looking to pluck, okay? The best youngest shoots are all going to be at the top of the bush. The harsher, maybe sort of like slightly more bitter leaves are a bit lower down. So you want to pluck the stuff up at the top, and then leaves will be withered, okay? Basically air dried, and that's how you get white tea. So it's very soft, very delicate, very crisp and pure form of tea. It's basically just been left out in the sun for a bit. The next stage, which would then bring us towards green, oolong and black teas, is rolling, okay? Much like, do you remember when we could go to bars and you had a mojito and they muddled the mint, they bashed it round a bit? What they do in that process is they roll the tea to try and crack the leaves and get the enzymes and juices flowing to really wake them up. And this then leads us into the fourth stage, which is sort of the oxidization process. Basically air, or an amount of air, is allowed to get to the leaves, which will then make it one of the remaining types. Now, have we got any green tea drinkers? Give us a wave if anyone likes a green tea. Quite a few people do. A lot of people go, yeah, only because it's good for me. Green tea, you don't want it to oxidize. So after it's been rolled, what they do is they put it in big vats or woks and essentially steam the leaf to stop the oxidization process. So it's still quite soft and quite delicate. So there shouldn't be a lot of bitter tastes. This is also why, as a non-oxidized tea, you shouldn't put boiling water on white or green teas. If you've been boiling the kettle and popping it on your green tea, you're singeing it and you're burning it because it's not hardcore enough to take boiling water. We'd recommend 80 degrees for green teas. So if you've not got a clever kettle where you can pop in 80 degrees, get your mug, pop your tea temple in, put about 1 centimetre to 1 inch of cold water in, and then add your boiling water. It'll just take the edge off. Or you can boil your kettle and let your kettle settle, okay? That'll just give it a bit of time. Because with that softer, cooler water, that's where you're going to get some of the more softer, delicate flavours that green teas really should possess, okay? Next up is oolong. Any oolong drinkers in the house? A few people there. Oolong sits between green and black tea because it's allowed to partly oxidize anywhere between half an hour to a couple of hours. So by partly oxidizing, it gives some flavors of the green tea. So it's quite crisp, but then there's also a bit of body. Okay, so the body gives it maybe like sometimes a smoky hint. So if anyone drinks a Lapsang Souchong, then an alternative to that could be an oolong. Sometimes oolongs naturally taste quite milky or quite sweet. So you think maybe has it had sugar in it or vanilla? They're naturally quite fragrant and floral, which is a nice alternative. And then finally, you've got your black teas. So black teas would be something like Darjeeling, Assam, Kenyan teas, also specialty black teas like chai and Earl Grey. These are allowed to fully oxidize, could be up to 10 hours, basically, as much oxygen and air is pumped onto the tea, really, really baked. And so it's nice and punchy, nice and dark in flavor. And that's when it's hardcore enough to be able to take that boiling water that comes straight out of the kettle. Okay, essentially think of that tea process as an apple. You bite into an apple, look at the flesh, it's white, it's crisp, it's juicy. That's like white tea, really, really pure, really, really soft and delicate. What happens when you leave an apple on the side after you've bitten into it for 3 or 4 hours, or if you cut it in half, the flesh would turn brown. Okay, so it's that oxidization which kind of starts that change in flavor and color. So the tea will go a darker brown color, and it's also maybe more of a dried fruit. So it's a punchier, stronger, deep flavor. So that is very, very quickly, I think I nearly stuck to 10 minutes. That's how you get from your plantation to your
Andy,
mug.
that is absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And I think if it's if it's not enough to convert us, the sort of pouring boiling water onto plastic and bleach, I mean, that is just such a hammer it home point of madness that I think all of us are possibly still doing on a regular basis. That really just makes you think, wow, why would you ever drink anything other than a plastic-free choice? And so, yeah, absolutely amazing. So how many tea varieties have you got? How many choices are there within Teapigs? What's the latest range?
As it stands, we're up to 34, but there might be a couple of new flavors coming this way. So that's the sort of standard range of your black teas, green teas, sort of fancier ones, maybe, which we include with your white and your oolong. The herbal infusion range. We've then also got our matcha, which is a Japanese
I think Louise was quite eager for us to use the matcha actually, and sort of almost challenged us to try and use matcha in the beer, which Stuart, I mean, I won't give your exact reaction to, because I'm not sure that's broadcastable, but it wasn't a thumbs up, was it, from the beer perspective?
I can imagine that being quite tricky. Basically, for those who don't know, matcha is essentially green tea that's ground up into a powder. And the benefits of matcha as a powder being that you ingest all of the goodness. So tea, not only has it got caffeine for a natural lift, it's got antioxidants in it, which are very helpful there. But if people are more and more, a younger demographic is turning to tea, and particularly within that, it's not just going to be black teas. It's not just going to be, as my mum calls it, tea. More people are looking at white tea, green tea, herbal infusions for these health kicks. We're all getting a bit more mindful and more into our wellness. And matcha particularly is brilliant, because if you're drinking green tea for the health, once you throw the tea temple away, some of the health goes in the compost with that. Whereas matcha, you're ingesting all of it. So it's like boiling your broccoli and just drinking the water and throwing the broccoli away. So with matcha, half a teaspoon of that has got the health of 10 tea bags of green tea. So it's nice and concentrated.
Although that boiling water from your broccoli or your greens is outstanding. Highly recommend people drink their goodness as well. And so very briefly, and are you happy with the lemongrass lager? Have we done justice to your outstanding tea?
Well, if I tasted it, I would say absolutely. But I am fuming that I've not yet had some. However, the guys in the office who have had it absolutely love it. And I think as well, my fiance, she's onto a lot of low alcohol alternatives and things like that. So she, I'm sure, can't wait. As a beer fan, I think anything with, you know, more of either fruit or floral or sort of citrus taste is really, really interesting and unusual in sort of like lagers or ales. And yeah, I for one can't wait to taste it. So we'll certainly let you know. But anyone who
on that embarrassing
very
bombshell, where we have just used you for your time and not even ploughed you with beer, so apologies. So I'm going to hand over to Louisa. Whilst I do that, please, if you've got any sort of questions, thoughts, ideas, drop them into the chat box and I will have a look for them. because we will wrap up fairly promptly after Louisa if there aren't questions. However, if there are, then obviously we can answer those. Love wild ideas as well that anyone's got for some of our future brews. If anyone is a big teapigs fan here that wants to kind of shout out for their flavour of choice that we should be utilising, go ahead. Or any other B Corp fans here that have ideas as to others we should be brewing with, or trusty beer fans who have ideas for us as well, please throw them in the chat box. I can see Tom, Craft Beer Hour connoisseur. Tom, does this get a thumbs up, thumbs down? It's awkward if you give it a thumbs down, but how are you rating this one in the many sort of low alcohol beers you must be tasting this month?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yes, I don't know if it's the right question to ask me because I'm going to shock you. I still can't decide if I like it or not. So I think it's a really clever idea. I think it's a really progressive idea. I can see. By the way, I don't mean it's not quality. I just mean that it's an unusual aroma. It's not a flavour that I'm, as you know, used to in beer. And when I had a can of it a few weeks ago, I actually kind of a little bit dismissed it. I kind of thought it was too overpowering. And listening to Stuart talk earlier, and I did have a question for him, which I can ask in the chat box, or I can ask you now, which is along the lines of, because he said that he was nervous, he took a bit of convincing, and I wonder if that's because this lemongrass is an overpowering flavour, and if you're putting it into a beer with very little or no alcohol, it's really difficult to avoid it being just like completely lemongrass, if you know what I mean. So that was a question I had for Stuart. I say I haven't decided if I like it or not. I am gradually making my way through it. I don't not like it enough to kind of, not drink it. And I've been smelling this beer more than any beer I've ever smelled. I'm trying to process the aroma in my mind because I think it's the aroma that I'm not too sure about, but the flavour, I think the mouthfeel's great. Classically, these sorts of really low non-alcoholic beers really struggle with a mouthfeel, and you do get used to them being really thin and watery, and that's just kind of comes almost with the territory. It's really difficult. I know I'm not a brewer with a brewing background at all. Just drink a lot of beer. I never brewed it, but I understand from a lot of people it's a very difficult balance. So yeah, it's growing on me, but it's because it's new flavour to me. I do like teapigs. I like tea in general, and I'm really interested in listening to the talk. But Stu, I'd be interested to hear from you about your reservations on what your reservations were. I mean, you may have covered that, but is it related to this being a very overpowering flavour?
So Stuart, hold that thought.
Yeah.
I'm going to just bring Louisa in just to briefly talk about the impact side of things and then hand over to you to answer that question. Cool. And Louisa, let's block Tom in the future. That was actually, honestly, that was cracking. That's really, really, really helpful insight. So Louisa, talk us through the impact side of the beer, the Rise Up series, what we're doing here. Obviously, people writing to their MP if they haven't done yet. So give us the full lowdown.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So we set Toast up 5 years ago. Now we're just coming up to our 5th birthday. So look out for news about that. There'll be another beer coming to help us celebrate. We set it because we wanted to change the food system. The food system is broken. The food production is the biggest contributor to climate change and biodiversity loss, and yet we're wasting 1/3 of everything that's produced. And so, Stuart's explained what we're doing by using surplus bread in the beer, which prevents that bread from being wasted, but also it reduces the amount of barley that we need. And barley is the biggest proponent of a beer's carbon footprint, typically. So the footprint of our beer, therefore, is much lower as well. But we also give all of our profits to charity to make sure that we can tackle some of the underlying causes of food waste. And we open source our recipe. We do collaborations with breweries all over the world. More news coming up about that in a few months as well. We've got something exciting planned. And the idea of that is because we want to change the industry and get the whole industry to be much more circular. This year is a particularly important year for the planet. We've got COP26 happening, which is many of you maybe already know about, which is being hosted in the UK, in Glasgow, in November. So it brings together leaders from all over the world to look at the Paris Agreement. So that's the climate change agreement that was agreed in Paris. So it's nothing to do with Paris, as certain governors in the US may misinform. It's just that it was agreed in Paris in 2015, and it's due to be renewed 5 years later, to be reviewed, to look at where we've got to and what needs to be done to minimise the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. And so we wanted to use everything that we've built through Toast, both our production methods, but our relationships, you know, the amazing community that we've built, to try to galvanise some serious action. But we wanted to do it in a Toast way, which is about being positive, celebrating all the amazing things that are being done, and the progress that has been done, and helping everybody to do their bit, both as consumers and thinking about the things that we buy, but also as citizens. So as Rob said, as part of our Rise Up series, we're asking people to write to their MPs, to ask our MPs who represent us in Parliament to stand up for the food system, and to look at the planet, to look at nature and climate in food policy. But to make this fun, we're telling the story of the food system through a series of 7 different beers. We launched one back in November last year with Divine Chocolate, and this one with Teapigs is focusing on the ocean. So the Divine Chocolate one was all about forests. This one's about the oceans. The future 5 beers will also each focus on part of the ecological story, so that we can talk about the food system, but in a really easy to process and understand way, and give people ideas to understand what's happening, but also what we can all do about it. So from the oceans perspective, the reason why we focused on this one is because the oceans play such an incredible, vital role to the health of the planet. They regulate the climate. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store that in the ocean, both through dissolved in gas in the water, but also the animals that once they die, they fall to the bottom of the ocean, and that's trapped there for forever on the ocean floor. The oceans also store heat, and then they release heat, which is why we don't get very, very, very cold at night, and we don't get very, very hot in the daytime. It helps to regulate that. And then, of course, the ocean is home to millions and millions of species, and a few of those we wanted to represent on the can. So we had some fun with the artwork on this can, and with each of the series, trying to talk about some of the biodiversity, the life that sits within each of these ecosystems. There's also a lot of people that rely on the oceans for proteins. About 3.2 billion people around the world rely on fish for protein, and it provides employment for over 60 million people. So it's a really important resource for humans as well, as an ecosystem service. But we're losing species so fast at the moment, about double the speed that we're losing species on land. And that's a mix of the way that we fish. Due to overfishing, we take more out than the oceans can sustain, and through the catch methods that we use through bottom trawling, as an example. Climate change itself is also making the oceans inhabitable for many species, changing the acidity of the water. So invertebrates, for example, are not able to form the hard shells. And then, as we've talked about, and the reason why we wanted to work with teapigs on this particular beer. Plastic, I think we all know, is a huge problem. There's about 8 million tons of plastic going into the oceans every year. And that's affecting ocean life, but it also affects us because it ends up in food chains and in the foods that many of us eat. So there are really simple things that we can all do. As I say, there is change happening, being led by business and other organisations all over the world. We can do simple things like reducing the amount of single-use plastic we have, thinking about our diets, so eating more plant-based diets, and so reducing, and it's not just about fish, because a lot of fish from the ocean is actually used for animal feed for the livestock industry. So by reducing the amount of meat and dairy that we consume as well, we're having less of an impact on ocean life. And also just supporting businesses like teapigs, choosing to buy tea that doesn't use plastic in their tea bags or in their other packaging. That's showing support for small businesses like that to grow, but also putting pressure on those bigger companies to change the way that they do business. And then, as I said at the beginning, write to your MP. We've got a really easy to complete form that's on our website, toastdale.com/rise up. If you just go down to the bottom, it will put in your postcode, it will find your MP. There's a letter there that you can edit if you want to send off, and just to tell our MPs that this is really important. At COP in November, we want them to represent the food system and make sure that food is working for people and the planet, not just for profit.
Beautiful, thank you, Louisa. So Stuart, some great ideas for beer flavors coming in here with sort of chili, chai, stout. So Louisa, we're going to need a theme for that one, I think. And I think ultimately, no excuses, everyone, please sort of do sort of as Louisa just asked, and pop onto the website and tap in your postcode and write to your local MP. We are lucky to live in the democracy that we do live in, and it will only change if we do make the effort to contact our MPs. So please do that on our behalf. We'd be very grateful. So yeah, Stuart, Tom's wonderfully stage managed question there about the beer that he's loving. If you're just logging in, Tom's very much enjoying the beer. And so is there, I think to sort of condense the question, is there good reason why we are maybe the first to use lemongrass in beer?
Yeah, and I think that the best way to describe that, Tom, is that 99% of what brewers do, although we may be craft people and you can see all sorts of innovative beers out there, fundamentally it comes down to we're a mix of scientists and artisans, and the usual ingredients, whether it be the barley, the hops, in our case the breadcrumb, we know the chemistry, we know the parameters behind that particular ingredient, and we can predict very well the kind of flavor profile that we would get. And just to put that into comparison, a hop may have 17, 18 different oil components on which we will know we'll get oranges flavors, lemon flavors, whatever from that. Now, the lemongrass, we have some of that information from the essential oils mainly, but not in the level of detail that I would have, for example, in a hop, because we've used the lemongrass much as we would do a hop. So it was a series of trial and errors in the lab on a small scale basis to try and find out what the level of lemongrass addition would be to A, achieve something, and B, not achieve too much. And then it's a case of, that's all well and good. Do we know if this is going to perform as the lab did? Because we're doing like 1 litre trials in a lab. Would that perform the same when we're making 5,000, 7,000 litres of this beer? And it was an unknown. So that was my hesitancy. So the artisan craft side is like, yeah, of course we can do it. It's the right oils, we can make this flavour. And in the back of my mind, my brewing qualifications are screaming at me saying, what on earth are you doing? You don't know the numbers. Yeah. So yeah, it always is a balance. That's the beauty of the innovation, I think.
Stuart, is there therefore kind of I mean, now that you may be one of few brewers in the world that will have some, sense as to how lemongrass acts in the brew house, is there any kind of open platform that you'll start to sort of plug any data into that other brewers can access? Where would you ordinarily go to? Or is it just acquired knowledge from, decades of brewing? Or is there somewhere that a brewer might turn to for the wild and the wacky ideas that you're putting into beers these days?
There's a number of brewers forums, and I think it depends on which one you enter into. Some of those brewers forums are very much, we've spent 200-300 years trying to remove the variability from brewing, so let's just keep doing what we know. There's others which are perhaps more informal networks of brewers around the country. So, for example, Toast's head office is in London, so if you were to go and talk to the members of the London Brewing Alliance, for example, that would be perhaps not now so much because we can't get out and do it, but certainly in the past, every quarter, those people would get together. So 50, 60 brewers from around London in a brewery in London would share some intelligence and market ideas. Somebody would be presenting their beers, and there would always be kind of a new beer was being produced for those brewers to check. So that's where the sort of the innovation might come through. Clearly, if you look at the craft market, there are some absolute disasters out there that are just completely wrong. But is it a disaster? I mean, I can't remember the guy, but who was it invented the light bulb that said he didn't actually invent the light bulb, he just failed to make it 99 times first. And it's an iterative process. We are being challenged with new ideas, new ingredients, everything from lemongrass through to, I don't know, peanut butter and cookie dough, for example. It's just about having had the idea, the creative idea, how do we actually make it work within a brewing process to demonstrate that flavour? So yeah, it's more of the informal networks with the brewers themselves that sort of getting these ideas out.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stuart. I think you've answered a couple of questions on the chat thread already as well, and a lot of love for your description of brewers as scientists and artisans. I'm sure Kristen will be popping that on Instagram straight away. I've got no doubt if it's not already on there, I suspect. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Louisa, any sort of, or Stuart, do you want to give us a very sneak peek on what might be brewing for the next release in the series?
Yes, I'm happy to, because I'm down there tomorrow looking at its progress. So I'll be in the brew house tomorrow. What could I say? It's well actually I've got, here you go. Don't know if you can see that. That's a slice that might give some people a hint.
Come on, give us more. You can tell us.
There's a bit of orange. It's a bit of coriander. No, we've got a we've got. Sorry.
No. I just reacted. Orange. Great.
No problem. We have some oranges and coriander, and we have a partnership with an organic bakery, Hobbs House, and as a celebration of the anniversary, we have got a wit beer coming out as the next one.
It's going to be a cracker. Cannot wait to try it. Well, thank you so much, Andy. Cheers to you. An amazing masterclass on all things tea. So 165 million every day.
That's
okay,
it, every single day.
Yeah, pub quiz facts. I'm trying to sort of
lock it in.
Lock it in there. Okay, thank you so much, Stuart. An extraordinary job, absolutely brilliant. Definitely I'm a bit biased, but genuinely the very best low alcohol beer that I've tried to date. It's outstanding. Louisa, amazing to hear about all of the impact. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to continue to share all of the info on the impact of the entire series and more to come. And thank you all so much for joining us this Tuesday evening. Cheers.